Hey everybody, welcome to another video review. So I've put up my review of the Weta, what is it? The War Troll, right? Yeah, the Weta War Troll and mini helm. And so I figured, I only have 3 Weta pieces, by the way. I have some issues with, I guess, their price point versus sort of their limitation and quality. So I wound up only getting 3 pieces from them that I felt, really I had to have. And the 3 pieces are the War Troll, and then this one I'm going to talk about today, which is of course the Balrog of Moria. And the last one is the full-size statue of Smaug from the Desolation of Smaug from the Hobbit. So those are the 3 what I consider the most iconic monsters or creatures from the Lord of the Rings. Oh yes, I also have Sauron, but that's boxed away. So those are the 4 pieces, excuse me. And I don't really have anybody else. I don't have Gandalf, I don't have the Witch King of Angmar. These are the 4 bigs, for me at least. So this is sort of the Weta is it? It's not a re-release. It's sort of like the Weta version, I guess, of the Balrog. So some history. I talked a little bit about this when I reviewed the War Troll. So I think that probably the one piece that is considered the holy grail of the sideshow Weta line 1/6 scale has to be the Balrog of Moria. That particular statue reached heights of 2,000 plus for a regular and maybe even 3,000 for an artist proof. And it was considered essentially the most sought after sideshow Weta piece of the entire collection. And small wonder, they released about 1,000 of them, which nowadays it seems like a pretty big number, but back then with the international appeal and interest in the Lord of the Rings, those got kind of snapped up really quickly. Also back then, understand that we were just in the beginning of the statue era, where things were getting very popular, and so this was before sort of the modern times where you're having customs everywhere, and all of these companies are sort of jumping onto the statue bandwagon. Back then, there wasn't a lot out there, and so the Balrog was kind of the most amazing part of the Fellowship of the Ring, the big monster, the climactic scene, of course, when they're running away from him, and of course the huge confrontation between Gandalf and the Balrog at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. And so it left such a incredible impression on moviegoers. Of course, the Fellowship of the Ring was a massive success. I believe it grossed close to $1 billion worldwide. And then the only way to get a representation of the Balrog was through sideshow Weta. And of course, the icing on the cake is that this was from the company who created the Balrog in the first place. So you had this level of authenticity that was simply unmatched. And so for that reason, that became sold out very, very quickly. And the prices skyrocketed. Pretty amazing that its retail price back then was only $300, as many of their pieces were, and of course it went up to over 2,000 plus eventually. I don't really know the current market for it because I haven't really looked into it for a while, but I would guess it hasn't fallen too much. So now, the original Balrog of Moria, though, does have a couple of issues with it, and that became a bit more noticeable after more and more people began to buy it and collect it. What are some of the issues? Number 1, the Balrog of Moria is actually a very, very small piece. It is 1/6 scale, which means that when you compare it to, for instance, this Balrog, it was maybe, I would say, 2/3 the height, much smaller piece. And so most pictures, of course, focus in on the Balrog where they're trying to sell it. And this was before even YouTube became huge, and so there weren't a lot of videos. But when you actually get it in person, or you see it in person, you realize, oh my goodness, it is a very tiny piece. And so the idea of such a small piece fetching $2,000 plus again, you have to kind of question the value of this, and you can see why they originally sold it for 300. So that's number one. Number two, the original Balrog came with a fire whip, which is a really nice idea, but because of the way that fire whip was posed, it's like a flexible wire in polystone. I would say that a majority of those whips came with cracks in the whip because you're bending it, and if you're not super careful with the way you're attaching the whip to the hand as well as the wing where it sits, you're going to crack the whip. So many Balrogs came with problems of that nature. And then the third and final issue is that the Balrog's tail, again, I'm talking about the original, there was some issues with maybe the polystone or the casting of certain pieces, and there was a weakness of the tail such that over time, for a certain proportion of the Balrogs, the tail would slowly droop and actually wind up resting on the base. So those are all kind of defects that are understandable when you're spending $300 on a collectible, but less so when you're dropping $2,500 maybe, on one of those. And of course, the biggest issue is that for so many fans, they never ever could even own a Balrog or Moria because it was sold out and the prices became so astronomical. So, what Weta then did was many years later, they decided to release another sculpt of the Balrog. This was to kind of give the fans an opportunity to get their hands on a piece that would otherwise just be a completely, out of reach grail. And they kind of went all out. I believe that the person who sculpted it, again, this is Weta, so it's completely accurate to the film. They have the digital files and everything, but they, gave us another version. And I think they made a lot of improvements. And if you kind of remove the nostalgia of having the original Balrog, I think, you can see that this one is superior to it in almost every fashion. So number one, it's incredibly heavy. I just picked it up off the floor to put it on this turntable to review. And it's just, massive. I don't think it's quarter scale, because I think scale is a little bit out of whack on the Balrog because he's so big. But this is way bigger than the original 1/6 scale version. Now maybe it's quarter scale, I don't know. I think it's a little bit smaller than that, but certainly much bigger. It's tremendously heavy. I would say probably 25 to 30 pounds minimum. So very heavy. The base is very solid. I do like the fact that the base is sort of the same floor as the original almost, kind of the floor of, the mines of Moria. He's stepping off of some rubble. Very nice base. The base is super heavy. He's super heavy. So when you put it together, it's an incredibly big and solid piece. I love the sculpt detail, which is just gorgeous. And here you can kind of see all of that. Here is the Balrog himself. The way they painted him very nicely. They can't make him glow, but they definitely did a really good job sort of painting the effects to sort of mimic the heat coming from him. And I think, people are so used to the Balrog bursting into flame because that's the image from the movie that kind of sticks with you, that they don't actually understand that the actual Balrog itself is usually in statue form depicted. He's kind of like volcanic rock. And so the conceit is that the majority of the body of the Balrog is actually like volcanic rock. And you can see the sort of the molten heat radiating from inside him and the fire that's kind of splitting the volcanic rock aside. So that's kind of the effect we're looking for. And I think a lot of people who buy the Balrog are a little bit surprised at how much of the actual piece is actually black, with again the subtle hints of the redness coming through. So here's the tail, here's the detail, and of course the beautifully sculpted flames. Right here you can see the flames on the wings, the flames over top. Here's the back. You can see that again, the glow in the way of the lava coming through. So number one, beautiful sculpt, beautiful detail, accurate to the movie, as this is from Weta, the studio that created him in the first place. Looking here at the musculature here of the chest, you definitely don't feel cheated. I mean, you feel like you really got a nice, solid, full-size, Balrog for the money that you're paying. Embarrassingly, I don't even remember how much I paid for this. There's a little bit of dust I'm wiping away. But I don't think this was cheap. I mean, I think it was at least $500, which is, I think it's over double the price of the original Balrog, but much bigger. I can take a look at the top. It's always difficult to do a believable flame, but I think they did a reasonable enough job considering what they had to work with. You can see the flaming sword, and then of course the classic, now iconic flame bursting from the top of the beast and down his back. So number one, bigger, more solid. Number two, instead of showing him, of course, with the fire whip in the right hand, they show him with the fire sword that he breaks out in the movie and smashes against Gandalf's staff. So they have the sword instead. So I kind of, respect that. They didn't want to completely devalue the original, so they didn't replicate it exactly. I also think they wanted to avoid any more issues with these whips curling and cracking. It's a lot more difficult, I think, to manage and sculpt a whip of that type than a simple sword. So I think they were very smart, and they went with that decision. Okay. So in my opinion, having seen the original and owning the resculpt, I feel like the resculpt, if you own this, I don't know if it would be worthwhile to sort of get the other one, because the other one essentially is a lesser, smaller, lighter version of this. It's not more detailed than this. And this one, of course, you can see that the tail right over here, there's no problems with it, drooping. The quality control is quite a bit better. And again, you don't have to worry about a breaking whip, a drooping tail, and it has definitely the size and mass that's worthy of Balrog. And with this, in your collection, you now have a representation of one of the most famous, creatures from the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it makes essentially the original almost superfluous. So again, I'm happy with it. This is, of course, now also sold out, and I believe it goes for a reasonable penny on eBay. They made a lot more of these than the original. I think sadly my box got destroyed in like a sewer flood a couple years ago. So the value of this guy for me is going to be a lot less, but I don't foresee myself selling him anytime soon, because again, as somebody who's a huge Lord of the Rings fan, for a series that captured my imagination, bordering on obsession for the better part of 5 years, I had to have a great representation of the Balrog in my collection. You have to get a Sauron, you got to get a Balrog, you got to get a Smaug. And if you love Lord of the Rings as the movie, as a book, these are kind of three iconic creatures you have to get. And then you have to get a real good cave trome. So that was my rationale for picking up these 4 statues. I have a lot of them, of course, busts, mini busts, and mini helms from Lord of the Rings, but I don't have any other of the statues other than that. And I used to own some of the premium formats from Sideshow, like the Berserker, for instance, and the Moria Orc, and those were cool, but at the end of the day, when space became an issue, I did sell them because you have to make some decisions eventually anyways. So just kind of, turning him around. I've been playing with him all this time while talking. Again, hope you can sort of appreciate some of the texturing of the sculpt. I think the paint job obviously could be a little bit better. If you, pay somebody to really go over this, I think they can really bring this thing to magnificent life. But this is the factory paint job, for what it's worth. I think that the quality of the sculpt is right there. But you can definitely do a better paint job. And I think one of my criticisms of Weta in general is for the paint that they're giving you. I think their products are a little bit overpriced, maybe more than a little, quite a bit overpriced. And so I don't really want to buy from them unless it's something that's really a must-have. I think the factory they contract with could definitely do a better job, where they're not paying the right amount of money for the sort of work that they're creating. But here again, you can see beautiful detail all the way throughout. You can see all the spines, the claw, the nails. Again, I think you can really do a much better job with the glowing effect of the molten rock, the heat emanating from inside. I think a great paint job could really make this thing just go bonkers. They released a large bust of the Balrog that lights up. And I think that obviously is going to look a lot better than having to redo all of these effects with heat. So I think if Weta is kind of going that route instead of having to do this. So here you go. And again, for somebody who never would manage to own the original and only was able to see it very briefly, it's just a nice opportunity to kind of finally be able to appreciate the sculpt for all its detail and to see it in front of you and appreciate all of that. It's really, really special. It's really nice. So this will always be the Balrog of Moria. I'm going to back up a little bit so we can definitely see him in all his glory. I mean, the Balrog of Moria will always be the centerpiece, and will always, in my opinion, will always be sort of the flagship of the Lord of the Rings statue line. I mean, you can have Treebeard, you can have cave trolls and all of that, but this is kind of the iconic monster from the Lord of the Rings. Maybe, I guess maybe a 1A, 1B, this guy is Sauron, perhaps, but for me, it's still the Balrog #1. So I hope you enjoyed that little, review. This is an old review. I'm sure there's a lot of Balrogs of Moria out there, but kind of use this opportunity again to hopefully, drop some knowledge, talk a little bit about some facts that people may not know about. I was around, from the very beginning of the statue craze back in the Bowen days and the Sideshow Weta days. So I still remember personally a lot of that history, and maybe I'll go into it a little bit more too about, kind of what they were doing with the line and how they kind of overproduced and the bubble of the Sideshow Weta line, so the popping and all of that. But, here. So again, I'm certainly not first. I'm quite late to the party, but at least for my own personal archives, really enjoyed sort of reviewing this, sort of lingering on it. Such a wonderful design. Kind of resting on this one shot right here. So I've done the cave troll, I've done the Balrog of Moria. The next Weta piece I'm going to do, I don't know when I'm going to do it because that one is even heavier than this, but the next major statue I will be doing will be Smaug from The Hobbit, which in its own right is an amazing piece as well. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed that review and do take care.